going to introduce myself. My name is Melinda Williams, and I am a parent of a son who attends Harc.
Well, thank you, Melinda. We're very happy to have you with us today.
Thank you. I'll go on mute. Thank you so much.
Okay. With that being said, Ben, I'll let you take it away.
Cool. Can everybody see my screen? Is that what everyone's seeing right now?
Yeah.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, welcome everyone. It's good to see all of you. My name is Ben Shaiken. I am the Director of Government Relations at the Connecticut Community Nonprofit Alliance. Marian asked if I would spend a little while with you this afternoon talking about the state capitol and trying to give you the tools and tricks that you need to spend some time up there advocating for Harc and their services. Sorry?
It's not working well.
My audio is not working well?
We can hear you.
You can hear me? Maybe just
Yeah,
Adrian. So
it was.
I see some
went out.
I see some familiar names and hear a familiar voice in the conference room, and so Dawn and Adrian and Rick I hear, and some others here. We've spent time together over the years at the state capitol, and so you are all as good at this as I am, I would say. But I'm glad to see some new faces and definitely want to spend some time just going over what we work on there and how you can be an effective advocate. So this is our agenda today. That should say 2025. My apologies. And we'll go through it. I should have about 45 minutes or an hour, and then we'll have plenty of time for discussion afterwards. As Marian said, the Alliance is the statewide association of community nonprofits. We represent about almost 300 organizations across the state that provide all sorts of different services. So we're the association for all different kinds of nonprofits. We are also the trade association for the nonprofits that work with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So in Connecticut, there's one big overarching association. That's us. And the folks that you see in front of you is our in-house public policy and advocacy team at the state capitol. Many of you have probably run into Julia over the years. Julia is the person who works with our intellectual and developmental disabilities division, which is our group of all the providers that work with DDS. But all of us have been around for some time. Monica's the newest person on our team. She started a little over a year ago. John Carl is our CEO. We also work with some contract folks that are consultants to us that work at the state capitol. We work with a lobbying firm called Rome Smith and Kowalski. Many of you may have run into Pete Smith over the years. Pete retired last year, and so the firm has been taken over in part by Chris Smith, no relation, just a common last name, who's someone who's been around the state capitol for 25 years or so. Pete's son, Mike, also works with the firm and is on our account. And then we also work with a state budget consultant named Spencer Kane, who's been involved in this field for many, many years. He worked for the Office of Fiscal Accountability at the legislature during his career, and he retired probably 15 years ago or so and works with us on the state budget. And Patty McQueen, who does all of our communications work. So if you saw us on TV yesterday, that's Patty's handiwork. We held a press conference yesterday to talk about our legislative agenda. 30 more seconds about us on the Alliance. Policy is not all that we do, and so we work with all of our members, including Harc, on all sorts of other stuff related to their business as nonprofits, training for their staff, capacity building for their organization. Our organization provides tuition discounts to their staff. We do a big conference every year. These are some of the folks at our organization that they work with outside of our advocacy work. But we are focused at the state capitol on advocacy, and that's the primary goal of our organization. We want to make sure that the nonprofits that we represent and their place within the state budget is strong and getting stronger. And we do it because the representation for the people that they serve and their needs is really important. And that's kind of where you all come in as family members. The services that our members provide, the impact that those services have on all of our communities and on our state as a whole is really important. And legislators and the governor and people who are making policy for the state need to know about it. They need to understand it. Thank you to my office mate here. And they need to hear about it, because if they don't hear about it from us, there's no other person out there who can tell it to them. And so unless, as I'm sure you are all well aware, unless you've got a family member with disabilities, or you know someone who has a family member with disabilities, you probably don't really know what life is like to have a disability in Connecticut and to advocate for the services that that your loved one needs, and for the nonprofits that are providing those services, what life is like for the people that are in the residential facilities that are taking consumers to work and everything like that every day. And there's no easy way for someone who's elected to the state legislature or to the governor's mansion to get that information except from us. And so if we don't do it, someone else will step into that void. If we don't do it, there's no one else who will be waiting there to make sure that everyone understands what things are like for the people who rely on nonprofits. It's 500,000 people across the state. It's about 10% of the state budget. It's also easier than you think. And I'm sure that some of the folks who've spent a lot of time up at the state capitol over the years can back up some of the statements that we've got here from some of our members, that the first time you do it's probably the hardest time that you're going to do it. And the more time that you spend doing it, the easier it gets, the more that you learn about the process. And the process is driven by people. And the people who are the ones driving policy change in Connecticut are the kind of people who really depend on other people for their day-to-day. They're people who are elected by convincing other people that they're the right person for the job. And so they get to know people fast. And so the more time that you spend at the state capitol, the more frequently you contact your legislators, the more they'll come to rely on you, and you'll get to kind of know them. Families are an incredibly important part of this. So I work every day with people like Marian and Russell and 290 other CEOs of nonprofit organizations and their senior staff. And they are experts, and they know what they're doing, and they can communicate it really well. And that's great, but they're one voice, and legislators hear from all sorts of different people throughout their day. Sometimes they hear from lobbyists like me. Sometimes they hear from business leaders like Russell and Marian. But they also represent a significant, diverse constituency. And some of their districts are urban, some of them are suburban, some of them are rural, some of them are wealthy, some of them are poor, but all of them have a variety of different people in them. And so for them to only hear from lobbyists like me or from CEOs and senior staff like Russell and Marian means that they're missing a whole part of the story. And one of the things that we deal with as a challenge that we have to overcome is that we need them to understand that the things that Marian and Russell and me are talking about are things that affect, quote unquote, real people, and affect you as family members and affect your loved ones as people who are receiving services. And so you and your colleagues from around the rest of the nonprofit sector are really an integral part of the strength of community nonprofits and ultimately of the state. Legislators really can't get a great understanding of the breadth of the support that nonprofits have from their constituents across their whole district if they're only hearing from executives at nonprofit organizations. The more people and more districts that can say, hey, I'm not someone who works at a nonprofit. I don't have a job doing this every day, but I do have a family member that receives services and I live in your district. The more they can understand that this isn't just an issue that affects the district that Harc's headquarters is in. It's an issue that affects their district too. And your voice can help what we say at the Capitol be more diverse. That the different corners of the state that the voice is coming from, whatever your personal and professional background is, can help, and whatever your stature in your community and connections to your community is, can all help sort of lend a voice to people who are often kind of voiceless as the process, as the legislative process goes forward. And then finally, it works. And this is the other last thing sort of about why it matters. We are stronger together when we advocate together. And in Connecticut, our legislative process and our legislators are pretty accessible. And that's not true in every state, but it is true here. You can establish a direct and personal connection with your state representative and your senator. They don't have staff that gatekeep them from you. They are in your district, and for the most part, are regular folks just like you and me. It's not a job that people take to get rich. It's not well paid. And so mostly people are folks that have other careers and other lives, or had them before they retired and ran for office, and can relate directly with regular people talking to them. And so we as an association, we really try to put a lot of our efforts into what we call grassroots advocacy, which is connecting legislators with regular people, whether that's family members or clients or staff at organizations, people who are just trying to get by on a day-to-day basis and can talk about how that all crashes into what happens at the state capitol and how important it is for what happens at the state capitol to take their lives into account. And we've had a lot of success. So even though we're still in this crisis mode, which we'll talk about on the next slide, over the last 5 or 10 years, we've made a really significant difference in what in the services that are being provided. And the biggest piece of that is that since 2021 or 2019, I guess, really, the legislature's added almost $400 million into the health and human services system in the state budget, which is about $1.8 billion. So a huge amount of that has come in. About half of that, a little more than half of it, has come into wages in the IDD sector, to the money that Harc is provided by DDS to pay the staff that work with your family members. And back in 2018, 2017, those jobs industry-wide, I don't know Harc's exact situation, but on average, they were paying folks to start around $11 an hour. And right now, the starting wage in DDS programs is over $17 an hour. We've had cost of living adjustments on these contracts as well over the years. We've also had a lot of success passing legislation that helps these providers. We've strengthened the way that our organizations like Harc are allowed to manage their revenue, and how little, and allowed them to retain revenue year over year, something that we've been working on for a long time. And we've really become the voice of nonprofits in an organization because of all the support that folks like you have provided us, that legislators think about. We are among the top priorities, I think, of the legislature this year, and have been for the last several years in terms of increasing funding. So let's talk a little bit about what our legislative agenda is for this year. I think I just shared this whole screen, and that means that if I switch things over, can folks see this other document? Yes, okay, cool. Let me just put it into full screen mode so you can really see it. So this is our legislative agenda for 2025. This is what we had our press conference yesterday to announce. We have heard loud and clear from our members that they are still in crisis, that these funding increases have been helpful, but have been entirely sort of eaten up by the crisis in inflation and in the workforce that has come since the pandemic. And that inflation has kind of added up to the fact that nonprofits are still 30% behind the buying power that they had back in 2007 before the Great Recession. So if you take all of inflation since 2007, it adds up to about 45%. And we've gotten about 15% in increases for nonprofits over the last 5 years, but we're still 30% behind. And that means that essentially the state is asking these providers to do the same amount of work for your family members with 30% less money. And that's just not possible. It would never be possible for any of us to be able to try to manage our households with the same expenses or growing expenses, but with less money. And so our request is to increase funding in the next fiscal year by $264 million, and in the following fiscal year by $237 million. And that will get us about halfway there. That's about 16%. It's about halfway clipped to where we need to be. And we know that there's not going to be any way to do that unless the state modifies what are being referred to as the fiscal guardrails, which are a series of restrictions that the legislature put in place back in 2017 that basically don't let the state spend the amount of money that is available to it. So we're collecting a certain amount of money in taxes every year. That money is the revenue that the state spends in its state budget. That money is more than $1 billion more every year than these fiscal constraints allow the budget to spend. And there's 8 of them. They're all very complicated. If I started talking about them, I could spend an hour explaining them to you, and you would walk away from this training knowing more about how the state budget works than probably all but 30 or 40 legislators. And so we're not going to do that because it's not important for you to know what they are and all of their various intricacies and details. What is important is for you to know that they're what's stopping the state from adequately funding these services. And your communication with legislators this session needs to be about how they need to be modernized and modified so that they can meet the critical needs that you have and that your community has. If a family was struggling to put food on the table, they all of a sudden, their financial situation improved, they wouldn't take all of that money and pay down debt and continue to not put food on their table. They would do both. They would pay a little bit of their debt. They would be able to put some food on their table. And that's all that we're asking for. We're not talking about throwing the guardrails in the garbage. We're not talking about getting rid of having a state spending cap or doing things that would be considered, wildly irresponsible to the taxpayers of the state. All we're talking about is making some modernization, some updates to them to reflect what's clearly a reality. Every year since 2017, we've had significant budget surpluses in the state. They've been $1 billion in all of the years but one, and that one was $500 million. And the state's projecting that we'll continue to have these surpluses for all of the ensuing years from now. And so what that means to us is that the state is in a very stable position in terms of the money that it's making. Our savings account is full. We have a full rainy day fund in the state. We've made billions and billions of payments down on the state's long-term debt over these years. And it's time to make some investments now in the services that so many people in the state rely on. And so that's our ask to the legislature and to the governor this year. Will it happen? That's a great question. And so we're going to talk now a little bit about how the legislature's makeup is and what that means for politics in the state. And then we'll talk a little bit about some tips for all of you as you're going into advocacy. So this is our state government. Ned Lamont is our governor. He is entering the last biennium, the last 2 years of his second term. He has not made any public announcement of whether he intends to run for a third term, which he is allowed to do, something that hasn't happened much here in Connecticut in the past, but is not unprecedented. He has said that he'll be making that decision publicly at the end of the legislative session, which is not surprising. He wants, as soon as he says, "Hey, I'm not running again," he loses all ability to. He becomes a lame duck essentially. And as soon as he says, on the flip side, "Hey, I'm running again," he paints a big target on his back, about making it difficult to work across the aisle in the building. And so we don't know what he's going to do. I would say nobody does, but he, as I'm sure many of you are aware, is probably the strongest defender of these fiscal guardrails in the Democratic Party, which is the majority party in the state legislature and in the state. And he is an essential part of the process of changing things, anything policy-wise in the state. He has as much of a say as the entire legislature because he gets to sign or veto legislation. Then we have a House and a Senate in Connecticut, unlike in Washington, D.C., where they're apportioned differently. The House and the Senate are apportioned strictly by population. So in the House, there's 151 members of the House of Representatives. Each House member represents about 20,000 people in the state of Connecticut, and their districts are drawn every 10 years just by population. So when population of the state changes, districts move around. Theoretically, they could add or subtract districts, although that generally doesn't happen. Usually just the number of people they represent changes. In November, the Democrats, unlike nationally, the Democrats picked up seats in both the House and the Senate. And so the Senate is 36 members. They each represent a little over 100,000 people in the state. And both of them now have 2/3 majorities. And they're the largest majorities that have existed in a long time. In the House, it's the largest majority since the 2008 election. In the Senate, it's the largest majority since 1984. And you see them here. There's 102 Democrats in the House. They picked up a net of 4 seats, excuse me, from the last term. In the Senate, there's 25 Democrats. They picked up a net of 1 seat. There's a vacancy in each chamber. A state senator from the Stratford area and a state representative from Groton declined to take the oath of office last week and are expected to be appointed to judicial positions. They're both lawyers. One will be a judge, one will join the Claims Commission. And so there will be a special election for those seats on February 25th. Those are both considered seats that will likely stay with the parties that they had. And so the likely makeup of the legislature will be 103 Democrats, 48 Republicans in the House, and 125 Democrats, 11 Republicans in the Senate. But always a chance that someone else wins those elections and the numbers change a little bit. An added wrinkle, of course, is that the Senate seat, it's possible that a state representative is going to run for it, and that will create another vacancy in the House, and there'll be another special election. But anyway, what the significance of the majorities here for us means is that for the first time in a long time, since there was a Republican governor, a governor of a different party than these majorities, both chambers have a veto-proof majority, meaning that if Governor Lamont vetoes a piece of legislation, a 2/3 vote of the General Assembly is required to overturn that veto. And now that 2/3 majority exists in either chamber. Now, the legislature has overridden vetoes all the time, but they've always had to do it with bipartisan support for overriding the veto. And so now, theoretically, that bipartisan support to override a veto is not needed in order for it to be overridden. And so theoretically, the legislature could make changes to these fiscal guardrails, and the governor could veto those changes, and they could override his veto. Now, that is almost certainly not going to happen. There are political reasons for it, and there are practical reasons for it. The political reason, I think, is that the governor is very popular, and it's unlikely that that 100% of the people in the legislature in his own party will break with him on this issue. The more practical explanation is that when majorities get bigger, there are people who are very moderate within the Democratic caucus, and those people may, on their own, have a similar opinion as the governor about the guardrails. So where this is important is probably not so much in the final outcome, but in how the negotiation happens with the governor to get to him to a place where he'll agree to change. And it gives legislative leadership, which we will talk about in a couple of slides, more leverage in those negotiations than they've had in the past. Connecticut has a part-time legislature. And so this is kind of the other piece of this conversation. The legislature, by our state constitution, only meets for 5 months out of the year in odd years. When we're in an odd year, it's 2025, it's an odd number. And it only meets for 3 months out of the year in even numbered years. And so we're in what's called a long session, and that runs from the first Wednesday after the first Monday in January to the first Wednesday after the first Monday in June. And next year will be a short session, which only runs from February until May. And so we have 5 months basically from today, or for less than 5 months from today, to get all of this done for a state budget that will cover the next 2 years. And the fact that it is time limited means that time is the most important currency in the General Assembly, and everything has a deadline. And there's different parts of the session where different things happen. And so again, we started a week ago. The governor's budget won't be out until February 5th. So it's not due to the General Assembly until the first Wednesday after the first Monday in February. So we won't have any sense of what's going to happen budget-wise. We won't know where the governor's head is at, where his proposal will fall until February 5th. And so in between now and then, kind of things are just getting going at the legislature. All of the committees, there's now 30 different legislative committees, are beginning to meet. They're beginning to decide which legislation they're going to consider. Until Friday, legislators are submitting. There's now almost 1,000 individual proposed bills that have been submitted. They're all like one sentence long. They're called concepts. They have no language in them, no legal language in them yet. Committees are starting to meet. They're having their introduction meetings. They're starting to vote to raise some bills to be drafted, to have public hearings. Public hearings will start up in a couple of weeks and they run through March. Committees who are the ones hearing those public hearings, will then draft legislation, and they have a deadline to act on legislation that they've drafted. Each committee has a different deadline, but they usually start kind of mid to late March, all the way until the end of April. And then the legislature, as a full body, the full House of Representatives and the full Senate, doesn't really start meeting to pass all of those bills until after the committee process is over, until the end of April. They'll meet a couple of times and confirm some judges and pass a couple of things, but for the most part, they won't start meeting in earnest in the halls of the Capitol, for those of you who've been there before, until May. This time here is a really important time for us. After the governor puts his budget out, the Appropriations Committee, which is the committee that writes this, a version of the spending side of the budget, will hold a series of public hearings. They split the budget up into sections, and they have a public hearing for each of the sections. And so one day, probably between February 10th and February 21st, the health section of the budget will have its public hearing. Health is the section of the budget that includes the Department of Developmental Services. And so that night is going to be a really important night for all of you to sign up and testify and talk about the services that matter to you. This is just a list of legislative leaders. Leadership in the Connecticut General Assembly. Oh, I'm sorry, this is incorrect. I have to change that. Leadership in the Connecticut General Assembly is really important. They, particularly majority party leadership, but both parties are really important. Matt Ritter and Marty Looney are the people who ultimately negotiate the budget with Governor Lamont. The budget comes through them. They have to get the votes in their caucus, but they're the ones who are in the room. Their staff, their senior staff, are the ones that are in the room with the chairs of the Appropriations Committee and Office of Policy and Management staff working out the details of the budget. As leaders, they're responsible to their caucuses and to their majorities, meaning that their job is to make people in their caucus trust them as leaders, to get their caucus's priorities done, but also to manage those caucuses when the priorities are competing. And so they are incredibly important people in how legislation passes and how the budget is set. And so for all of you at Harc, good news. Matt Ritter is very close to all of you, and you all have a really great relationship with him. And so I would do everything in my power, if I were all of you, to keep that relationship positive and strong, and keep advocating for him, and making him feel your presence as an organization. And the Senate Minority Leader, I forgot to update this slide, is now a gentleman named Stephen Harding, who represents a large district in northwestern Connecticut. So before I go on to sort of communication tips with legislators, let me just sort of talk process-wise, just a little bit about how critical it is that everyone in the General Assembly is hearing from all of you kind of all the time. I know, for example, today the House Democratic Caucus had a day-long meeting where they talked about their individual priorities, and they talked about the state budget. And they will continue to have meetings like this that are private, that we can't be a part of, where they will give feedback to their leadership about the direction that the leadership is taking the session. It is critical that every member of the General Assembly, Democrat or Republican, representative or senator, hear from people in their district about this nonprofit funding issue. The second that we stop pushing on it, that void will be filled with other groups. And we're not the only people out there who need money in the state budget. The chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee, Senator Kathy Austin, yesterday said in the press that they're up to $3 billion a year of requests that they've received from various interest groups in the state. And that's education, that's special education, that's higher education, that's us. It's free school meals for students. It's you name it, there's a need for the state budget to fund it. And as tedious and tiring as it is to do this year in and year out, I know many of you have been doing this for a long time. It's something that we have to keep up, because as soon as we stop, they stop thinking about us. And so as these conversations are happening with leadership, they start now, even though the budget negotiations aren't going to start until May. The conversations need to start now, and they need to continue from now until June 4th. So when you're having the conversations, what do you do? What are the sort of tips and how to communicate effectively? First of all, and I keep saying this, the most effective communication to a legislator is from a constituent of theirs. So I know everybody in the legislature, and I do a lot of work to make sure that they all know me. But I don't matter to anybody except State Representative Pat Boyd and State Senator May Flexer, because that's where I live. I vote for them. And if I don't vote for them, ultimately, they don't really need to do anything for me, except for out of the goodness of their hearts. And so you, as people who vote in your elections, your relationship with your constituent or with people who represent you where you live, or if your child lives in a group home where they live, is incredibly important. And it's something that takes sort of constant work. And I keep these pictures up. We've had a training like this for many years. And every time I update it every year, I say, I got to swap these pictures out. Every legislator in these pictures, that's Dan Malloy, that's Kelly Julson Scapino from Manchester, that's Tony Guglielmo. None of them are in office anymore. But all of these pictures were taken within the last decade, right? And so the people in the General Assembly change. And for those of us who've been doing this for a while, you've probably been doing this through, having lasted through a bunch of state reps and a bunch of state senators, but the building itself stays the same. And so continually updating and refreshing your relationships with people, both as they cycle through and new people are elected, but also as their seniority and understanding of the process changes. Legislators who stay around a while learn a thing or two, and they get new leadership posts in their caucuses, and they get to be more influential. And so having one conversation is never enough. Sort of continuing it year after year after year, week after week after week is really the most important part of establishing a relationship. Them seeing you in front of them with some frequency, whether that's face to face or in their email inboxes, over time develops a really strong relationship. So how do you talk to them? What's the best way to do it? So first, in-person meetings, tours of facilities. Again, if you don't have a kid with a disability, you have no idea what a group home looks like. You've never been to one. I always tell this story of, I think it was Oak Hill hosting a tour at one of their group homes, and the legislator calling them and saying, "Where's the sign? Like I'm trying to find this place. I mean, I think I'm in front, but there's no sign on the lawn. Like I can't be in the right place, right?" And then no idea. Of course, there's no sign at a group home. It's just a regular house. And so trying to get them out, particularly if the things in their district, some of them might know they're there. Many of them probably don't even know, unless they live around the corner, that this is in their district. In-person advocacy in the Capitol has changed since COVID. And legislators can now do some of their work virtually, and some of them choose to. So like I said, we're a part-time legislature, and so there are a lot of legislators that have jobs that aren't being legislators. And so they may be at those jobs a lot during the week until legislative session gets really busy. A number of the people who were just elected to the General Assembly are active teachers. And we've invited them to stuff, and they've said, like, we have an event next Friday in Hartford at Oak Hill. And they've said, "Hey, we'd love to come. I'm teaching a class that day. Like I have high school class. I'm a teacher." And so spending time with them in the Capitol itself is not as possible as it used to be. They'll do committee meetings virtually. They'll be on public hearings virtually. However, emailing them is a great way to stay in touch with them. And you might have at some point tried to, worked with a advocacy group that was trying to make change in Washington, D.C. and been told, like, call the office, don't send an email, right? The intern that picks up the phone in your congressman's office is going to mark down that you called, but your email might get ignored. Well, the opposite is true in Connecticut. In Connecticut, if you're a member of the House of Representatives, unless you're in leadership or you're a committee chair, you share a legislative assistant, an aide, with 5 or 6 other legislators. If you're a member of the Senate, you have one aide. That's your entire staff is one person. And so what that means is when you call my office, if I'm a state representative, my phone isn't going to ring in my office. My aide's phone is going to ring. And my aide, shared with 6 people, might take your information down and get it to me. But if you send me an email, my aide might have access to my email to help manage my calendar. But almost all state representatives and state senators, at least to some degree, manage their own email inboxes and read their own emails, respond to them themselves. And so unless you've got their cell phone, which has become way more common after COVID because everyone was texting them, and so they started giving their cell phones out, my first preference for you would be to email your legislators rather than call their offices, unless you're doing it in an organized way that people will notice. You're going to get more contact directly with them through email. If you have their cell phone, awesome. And if you get in a conversation with them, ask for it. When I started in this business, the few legislators' cell phone numbers that I had, I protected like gold, and I only used them when I really needed something because I felt like it wasn't cool. Now everybody gives them out because during COVID, you had to. It was the only way to talk to people, and they got accustomed to communicating by text. And so it's a much more common thing to have that shared. Don't feel shy using it, texting them, etc. And then you can write them letters if you want to. And Harc does this awesome thing. Actually, when we do this training for other people, I use Harc as an example about the Have a Harc Day when you do your Valentine's for them in February. That kind of stuff is really impactful. Handwritten things that are out of the ordinary. I can't tell you how many legislators' offices I go into that have a Harc card from some year on their wall. And so that kind of stuff matters. And so it is important. But if you're talking about like, how do I build a relationship? How do I make it so my legislator knows me? Email is the first way in. Email, set up a meeting. Try to get some follow-up conversation with them. So how do you get their attention and how do you get them to walk away from your conversation ready for action? So the first thing is to keep your message short and to the point. We all know how complicated the service system is, how complicated the needs of your family members are. And you're all experts in it. And so you could probably spend a lot of time explaining the various ins and outs and nuances of why you're asking for what you're asking for. But don't overload them with too much information. What they want to know is like, what can I do to help you? Like, cool, I hear you about all that stuff, but how can I help? And so always be ready to have a specific ask for a legislator and be more specific than please just support us. Because of course they'll say, of course I support you, right? How? How? So we often tell people, speak up in caucus, talk to your leadership, because you can't like co-sponsor the budget as a bill. Like we're working on a big budget issue, not on a particular piece of legislation. So always have an ask when you're talking to them. It could be, I'm glad you support us. Look, can you come out and see the facility yourself? Can you bring some legislators from around the district with you? You don't have to be an expert in everything. And so stick to what you know, stick to what you are an expert in. Legislators have to know a little bit about everything. And so they'll often say, okay, I hear you, but well, how am I going to do it? Like, tell me how to make it happen legislatively. Like, how exactly should I change these fiscal guardrails? Or how exactly should we? You don't need to know the answer to that question. You can literally say, it's a great question, and that's what I'm hoping you're going to be able to figure out, right? But here's what I'm here to tell you, that this is the need. And so I don't think it's something that they use mostly consciously as a way to divert from responsibility, but it is something that you'll hear, and you don't need to have to feel like you have an answer to it. And then finally, leave contact information with them, business card, anything so that they can get in touch with you. And my trick here is always to try to create some opportunity for them to ask you a question you don't know the answer to or whatever, so that you can say, you know, I got to find out some more information about that and I'll get back to you at another time. And then you've created a second opportunity to have a conversation. Again, legislators care most about people who live in their districts, so try to leverage your network. If you have people who live in a variety of different towns, getting them all together to contact their legislator will have more impact than you. Harc serves and employs people that live all over the place. And so mobilizing all of them to do this, not just sort of having it all fall on you, will be really helpful. And then after you've done all that, cast a wider net and talk to legislators about the whole area that you serve, not just the place where you vote for them. We're almost done with my part. So let's just talk quickly about public hearings, because we mentioned them earlier. So they're your opportunity to be heard officially as part of the legislative process in the state. And so this is a little wonky, but I talk about it because I think it's important. Every bill that passes the General Assembly pretty much must have a public hearing in the originating committee. And the legislature, with one exception, is not allowed to pass a bill that hasn't had one. In Connecticut, public hearings are open to everybody, and That's not true everywhere. If you wanted to go testify in the United States Congress, you might be able to submit written testimony, but you can't just show up at a hearing room, sign up to testify and get 3 minutes. You have to be invited. They do panels, and other states do that too. In Connecticut, anybody who wants 3 minutes gets it, as long as you follow the rules. So dates of public hearings are published at least 5 calendar days before the hearing. So it's not a lot of notice. That means Friday evening for a Tuesday hearing, but you do get notice of them, and so you can keep track of them. And then all testimony stays with the bill throughout its entire legislative journey. So this is maybe less important for the state budget, but if you're working on or care about a different piece of legislation, your testimony will get summarized in an official document, and legislators look at it as they're trying to decide what to vote for on the whether to vote for the bill or not. It also stays with the bill forever. So if there's ever like a question about what the law means that goes to court, judges, like lawyers, will look at legislative intent. They'll look at what the legislators said as they were debating the bill on the floor, and they'll look at the public hearing testimony as a way to try to figure out what the heck they meant when they wrote this into the law. So all public hearings are hybrid. And so that means that you can testify in person or you can testify via Zoom. This is not changing. We had heard some rumors this year. Maybe this was going to change. It has not changed. You can also watch all public hearings on YouTube or on CTN on TV. If you're testifying virtually, you'll be invited to a Zoom link and admitted into the room to testify when it's your turn. It works just like this meeting. You'll unmute and get to talk. There's no limit on how many people can testify in a hearing. This is another thing that we've heard rumors that they're going to try to change, but they haven't yet. The hearing goes until it's done. And so sometimes that's late at night. Sometimes it's early the next morning, but that's how it works in Connecticut. Everybody gets 3 minutes plus questions and answers from legislators. Each committee now operates a virtual lottery to sign up members of the public. And that's different for those of you who've been doing this for a long time, who remember having to show up at 7 in the morning and get in line to sign up to testify. That's all gone. Now all you do is fill out a form by the day before the hearing, and by 3 o'clock on the day before the hearing, and then you're entered. Your order is totally randomized from that. And so you tell them there, hey, I'm going to come in person or I'm going to be Zoom. Everybody gets a Zoom link, whether or not you're signing up in person or remotely. So even if your plans change, you can always show up in person if you've signed up virtually, and vice versa. If you're there, it gets too late, you got to go home. That's fine. You can always pick it up via Zoom and jump online and get your 3 minutes there. Testimony tips. Keep your testimony short. You only have 3 minutes. Sounds like maybe a long time. It's not. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard people get through why they're there or an introduction and then have the bell go off. And so identify yourself and why you're there. Say thank you, and then state why you're there. I am for this bill. I'm against this bill. I'm testifying about the budget. But you don't need to spend a heck of a lot of time in your 3 minutes doing the rest of the formalities. Now, if you're going to submit written testimony, absolutely do the formalities. Thank the chairs and ranking members. Don't forget the ranking members. They're very important to this process, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say thank you to the chair who's a Democrat, to the vice chair who's a Democrat, to the members of the committee, while the Republican is sitting right in that room who's the Republican leader of that committee and getting passed over. They notice, they don't like it, and it's not worth anybody's time to leave them out. But if you're going to be there in person for 3 minutes, hi, I'm Ben Shaiken. I work at the Connecticut Community Nonprofit Alliance. I'm here to talk about the state budget. Thank you to everyone for having me tonight. Here's my testimony, right? You don't need to spend more time than that. And if you've got things you want to get to, I would recommend that you don't. Similarly, if you've written your testimony, you don't need to read it. And in fact, I would recommend that you don't. If you're the kind of person who can just talk. If you're the kind of person who writes bullet points notes for themselves in order to do this, do that. If you're the kind of person who needs to read something, write something separate. Legislators will have your written testimony in front of them, and they're going to tune out as soon as you start reading what your testimony says. And so I encourage people to try to tell a story. Pick a piece of your testimony that you can expand upon. If you've been listening to the hearing beforehand, build on something someone else has said. If you happen to hear like the state agency commissioner testify at the beginning of the hearing, provide a different perspective than them, but call it by name. Hey, I heard Commissioner Sheff say this earlier, and that's interesting because my experience has been different. Those kinds of things are what legislators will pick up on and will remember. And then make sure at the end always to sum up your position and to offer follow-up. So there's a couple of reasons for this follow-up. One, it can invite questions. So if you're testifying on the state budget, there's not going to be any questions. The Appropriations Committee doesn't allow them. There's just too many people. But anywhere else, if you end your testimony with, hey, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, you might get some questions, and then you can talk as long as you want. There's no timer on the questions. Secondly, it lets you open the door to having more of those conversations with people on the committee. If they say, hey, I would really like to follow up with you, then you can set up some time to have more conversations and kind of expand your reach to just that 1 3-minute block. Your testimony, when you submit it in writing, doesn't have a length limit on it at all. So it can be as long or as short as you want. I always pull this up. This was a bill from many years ago that was proposing to increase the tax you pay for a marriage license in order to fund domestic violence services. And this is Franklin Rutledge's testimony from that bill. And it's on the official record for whatever year this was, Senate Bill 2017, Senate Bill 1011. And so if you're going to submit written testimony, you don't have to write a research paper. You can just write a couple sentences or a couple paragraphs about who you are and why it's important. You also totally could spend time writing, researching, and giving the legislature data and information, and they appreciate it. So it's totally up to you how much time you want to invest, but you don't have to, and also you can. Unlike, you can say way more in your written testimony than you'll have time to say in 3 minutes. If you get questions, only answer the questions that you can answer correctly. It can be flustering, and sometimes the questions come out of left field. Legislators sometimes ask things because they've been thinking about them, and you've never thought of that before. It happens to me all the time. And it's totally okay to say, it's a great question. I'm going to have to get back to you about the answer to it. I don't have the answer in front of me right now. It's much, much, much more preferable to do that than to give an answer that's wrong or to speculate and not be correct. And so you're on the record. It's just say, it's a great answer. I don't have the answer in front of me. Let me look into it and I'll get back to you. And then it creates that opportunity for follow-up too. Don't argue with members of the committee. Should go without saying, but sometimes it happens and it doesn't help anybody. And so sometimes committee members will, for political points that have nothing to do with you, will try to pick fights with people who are testifying. It happened in the Housing Committee last year with people who were testifying about eviction. It's not worth anyone's time or effort to engage in the argument. You can just sort of let it happen and move on. If you're saying, oh, maybe I'm just going to submit testimony today, I'm not going to testify in person, I would strongly encourage you to try to find the 3 minutes to talk to people, particularly as family members, and particularly on the state budget. The state budget is going to get thousands and thousands of pieces of testimony. And so the likelihood that all 54 members of the Appropriations Committee diligently read every single piece is pretty small. But they're going to remember the story that they hear at 9 o'clock on Tuesday night when it's the DDS public hearing night. And so it's really important that you stick with them. Finally, just some contact information for the different offices. A note, if you want to try to follow along with the legislative process, the Connecticut General Assembly's website is very, very informative and has tons and tons of information on it. Most importantly, I want to draw your attention to this document right here, which just says Bulletin. This is published every day during the legislative session. It is just called The Bulletin. But what it is the official notice of everything that's happening in the legislature. So here's today's at a glance. This is everything that happened in the General Assembly today. And then importantly, this is how the legislature does public notice, right? So everything that happens, there has to be noticed to the public. This is the document where that notice happens. And so this is where all of the committee meetings that are coming up are noticed. This is where public hearings are noticed, where you can sign up to testify in public hearings. So here's an example. We'll just show it real quick. There aren't a lot of them right now, but here's one. There's a waiver that the Appropriations Committee is hearing on Thursday next week. They're required to have a public hearing when the state submits changes to Medicaid to the federal government. And so when there's a public hearing, this is what you'll see. The committees will hold a public hearing at this date. You can watch it here on this YouTube link. You may be, you can be broadcast on CTN. If you want to testify, you have to click on this link for this form, and registration is going to close the day before the hearing at 3 o'clock. So when we click on the link, there's a Zoom registration page for your name. And if you register, you'll be signed up to testify at that hearing. When public hearing season kicks off, the book's going to be filled with those things. So if you want to pay attention yourself and you don't want to rely on me and Marian to tell you when things are going on, it's a simple thing that you can check every morning or a couple times a week and get notice of when things are happening yourself. But you can also rely on us, and we will tell you about everything that you need to know, that we think you need to know about at the legislature. And that's what I've got for you. So I'm happy to take any questions that you have and any discussion that you might want to have about this whole process. And I can pull this off the screen so that we can talk.
So if anybody wants, if anybody has a question, feel free to raise your hand. I see Joe and Donna. Was that you raising your hand?
Hi, and Donna. Ben, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. Just a general question. Were any a substantial amount of monies reclaimed by the OPM from those from DDS? I was having a conversation with a legislator who found it odd that he had heard that. Do you know anything about it?
There's a few different things that could mean. I think it's possible that the DDS budget has what are called lapses in it, and that means that DDS, they appropriated money to DDS that DDS has been has not spent for some reason, and when that happens, it can go back to, like, the OPM basically can propose to use it for another purpose midway through the year. And so my guess is that is probably what they were talking about. I don't know of any lapses off the top of my head, but it's possible that we missed them, or that they just happened. I think DDS would tell you that they are going to have lapses in part because they've been unable to hire staff themselves. And so they've got vacancies that they have money to pay people but can't hire them. And I also know that they have been appropriated a number of dollars around the waiting list, but have not been able to spend all of them because they haven't been able to get programs open because providers can't hire staff. And so that may be some of the things that are lapsing at DDS, but I don't know for sure.
Thank you, Ben. I think that's it. I think you hit it on the head. Thank you.
Melinda, would you like to speak?
Yes, I would. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be here. Ben, it's nice to meet you. I just want to tell you that I am currently in my 6th semester. I am a parent. I love to say my son's name, Christopher. He attends Harc. He's 37 years old. And I am in my 6th semester of college in human services, and you sound just like my professor from last semester. I'm like, am I dreaming here? Thank you so much. It was very detailed. Your presentation was very detailed, and it's as if it was a repeat of my last semester's class. So I really appreciate the information, double time. I just need to say that I'm a parent who we live a very structured lifestyle, and I am here to be a voice as a parent. This is why I'm in college right now, earning my associate's degree in human services at 60 years old. So this is new for me. I would like to be excused actually because I have a research class at 6 o'clock today. Yeah, and I have to put, Chris eat at a certain time. So I would like to stick to my schedule. But whenever you guys have something like this, please keep me involved. I would definitely love to learn how to be a voice for not just my son, but for other parents, other children who are challenged. And I really believe in this. So, and I'm passionate about it. So thank you so much, but I really do have to go and prepare supper and prepare for my class. Okay?
Thank you so much, Melinda. Can you guys hear us? Because our sound cut out here.
They can hear us.
Okay, good. So I just want to say that
Now I can't hear you.
This is the first in our series of trainings that we're doing. Can you hear us now?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So this is the first in the training series that we're doing. We're planning on doing these quarterly to offer resources to families so that you can help to support your loved one, to help them to live a life of quality, inclusion, and dignity. So the series that we're doing right now is based on topics from a survey that we sent out that many families, probably many of the ones in this room right now, responded and told us what you want to hear about. So this is really us trying to support you, to help you to support our community as a whole. So thank you so much for being here.
And I'll see you guys next time.
Okay, come to have a Harc Day too, February 14th.
Absolutely, I'll be there. Thank
Great.
you so much.
Marian, I think
Great.
Adrian's hand is up.
Yeah.
Yep, I saw that. Adrian, go ahead.
Hey, thank you, Ben. That was great. And it's true that I've been doing this for a long time, but I still learned things from you, so thank you. I just wanted to make another suggestion for families. If you in any way can bring your family member to meet to the legislative office building, if you need to bring another, an extra person with you because it's hard to manage them by yourself, please work on that. It's nothing like seeing the reality of our folks that really does stun some of the legislators. And it helps them get a sense of what the kind of challenges our family members have. Now, some family members have more challenges than others. My daughter's totally nonverbal and behaviorally unpredictable. And she's also adorable. So that's great. We have both residential and day program services from Harc and are very grateful. But if you can't bring your family member because of whatever the reasons are, that's fine. Bring pictures. If you have a little video on your phone, and not of them being perfect, but of them being challenging, it can really help. One time I showed Beth Bai, who was a senator back in the day, a 1 minute show, a 1 minute video of Zoe acting out in a very extreme, difficult way. And then I followed up by showing her an adorable video. And she was almost teary when she saw what Zoe was like when she was upset. So it really makes an impression. And that's my suggestion. Thank you.
Let me unmute.
Okay.
Go ahead, Rick.
And something I know some of my friends have done is to make
a blow-up picture of their child or loved one and bring that, and you can get those made up at Walgreens, CVS, and lots of other places. They're not terribly expensive. But that's not as good as having them there in person. And I know in at least a couple of cases, a person bringing their family member actually resulted in helping them to get services, residential services. So
Great suggestions. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? I see Val. Go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that, I was on I think my email came from the Connecticut Family Support Network. I'm not a Harc, our son is with Favar. So we do get the blast from, Arc Connecticut, those kind of things. But for these types of, informative information, I just want to know how to make sure that I'm on that list.
So Val, I'm pretty sure we have your email. So we can just kind of keep you posted and we can
Okay.
add you to our mailing list.
Yeah.
And then you'll get direct emails from us. So
That'd be great.
generally what we do, and see, that just actually proves that this is really, that we are a community. And, the fact that you got this, information through CTFSN, and that makes me so happy to hear that, we're actually casting a wide net and really helping the IDD community as a whole. So generally what we will do is we will follow the bills and advocacy that the Alliance follows, as well as we have our own advocacy agenda, which sort of is adjacent to theirs. So a lot of the Alliance initiatives really focus on the business of running the nonprofits and focus on the funding that's necessary to support your loved ones. Ours is that really plus the individual rights, advocating for additional housing, things like that. It's a little more specific to our community. It really does work in tandem. And so we are happy that you could come today, and we hope that you'll continue to be part of our network.
Thank
And
you.
Val-
It's pretty timely because we have a new state senator, Paul Honig, and we're meeting with him at our house tomorrow night, just a small, group. Oh, right. So like I said, this was very
Great.
timely with the pointers, et cetera.
That's
So
great.
thank you.
Great.
Fantastic.
Val, may I just confirm, is your last name Wiseman?
Correct.
Okay, I've got your email. You guys,
Okay.
we've got you.
Perfect.
Thank you.
And I noticed that there were a couple names that were on here that weren't, they're different than names that we had registered. So if you want to drop your emails in the chat, we are happy to add you to our network if we don't already have your email. I know in some cases, some people might have signed up for somebody else.
Yeah.
So we might not have the right email. So anybody who wants to drop their email in the chat, we are happy to include you in any of our advocacy efforts, to invite you to any of the events that we have going on. Our next big advocacy event is Have a Harc Day. So for those of you who don't know, Have a Harc Day is our annual advocacy event that is always on Valentine's Day. So we will be at the Legislative Office Building from 10:30 to 12. We will be sending some information out to register to attend. If you could let us know if you want to speak, that would be great. And really, it is an event where legislators come to hear from our community. As Ben said, we are sort of branded as Have a Harc Day. It's something we've been doing for probably, at least 10 or 15 years, I believe. And one of our trademarks is that we essentially pass out Valentines to the legislators, and it has our advocacy agenda on the back of it. So that's how we kind of get our word out and get our message out. And so we are so happy to have anyone who wants to come, attend, and be part of that event and speak, because, you know, it's not just about the people that we at Harc support. It's about the IDD community as a whole. And, you know, it really is a partnership of all the different organizations, from the Harc to CTFSN, to the Alliance, to, you know, really all of, I think there's so many others out there, Families First. There's so many different organizations, and we really, you know, strength is in numbers. So the more we can get people to show up for events, the better off we are, and the more we're heard and the louder our voice is.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and so the other thing is that we will send out emails as well about advocacy events, opportunities to advocate. Like Ben said, they usually the Alliance tells us when the budget hearings are, and we send that information out to our network. So feel free to join, and we really do hope that you know, you do attend and work with us to support. Yeah. Does anyone else have any comments, questions, feedback? Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Ben, for spending time with us tonight. We appreciate all of your dedication and your continued advocacy for not just us as an organization, but every organization that supports people with IDD.
Thanks all. Have a good night.
All right. Have a
Thank
good
you.
night.
Thank you, everyone.
See you soon.
Do we get those emails?
Oh, I've got them. And
The,
then,
the ones that they just put in the chat?
I've got you. And then, yeah.
But I can't see them from
Yeah.
here because I'm blind. It happens when we get older.
Yes, it does.